Just when you thought the Wendy and Eddie story couldn't get messier, the prosecution quietly dropped the most explosive detail yet. Multiple aliases and more than 40 credit and debit cards allegedly linked to the couple. On paper, it sounds like the script of a bad crime drama: fake names, luxury shopping, and a reality TV couple already under fire for an alleged staged burglary. But this isn't a movie. This is the life of Dr. Wendy from Real Housewives of Potomac and her husband Eddie, now fighting for their freedom, their reputation, and their future in front of millions of watching eyes. Prosecutors say the aliases were part of a deliberate attempt to hide their identity and their financial trail. Supporters say this is what public figures do just to protect their privacy. Critics say it looks like a blueprint for fraud. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, one question keeps coming up. Are Wendy and Eddie reckless masterminds of a financial scheme, or targets of an over-aggressive investigation that's already decided they're guilty? Because it's not just about credit cards and names on paper. It's about how far the state is willing to go, how much of their private life gets dragged into the spotlight, and whether this case is really about justice or about making an example out of a reality TV couple. For weeks, we've only heard one side: court filings, leaks, headlines. Tonight, we hear theirs. For the first time since the aliases revelation went public, Wendy and Eddie have released a joint statement defending themselves, calling out bias, and explaining exactly why those other names exist. Let's listen carefully.
Eddie and Wendy released a joint statement on their social media yesterday, so I do want to get into that and divulge. Because I will say this, after reading their statement, I kind of was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. And there are some people that are saying that the prosecution is overreaching at this particular point. They've never seen prosecution do something like this. But I feel like so many people say this all the time about the prosecution. We will just have to wait and see. As Wendy said during BravoCon, well, she said in her statement, her initial statement, that she's looking forward to her date in court. And what she said at BravoCon, that these are just allegations and she looks forward to telling her story. To me, that sounded like a setup for her next season of Real Housewives of Potomac. So this was a statement that she released via her legal team, but she did post this on her social media and Eddie's social media.
Just when everyone thought the Wendy and Eddie story couldn't stretch any further, couldn't twist any deeper, the aliases revelation exploded across the internet, instantly shifting the entire narrative. The headlines were already wild. Insurance fraud allegations, seized emails, bank records, Instagram accounts. But nothing prepared the audience for the claim that this couple, this polished, camera-ready pair from Potomac, were allegedly tied to more than 40 credit cards and multiple alternate identities. And then, for the first time, they spoke. Their joint statement didn't whisper, it thundered. A carefully worded, tightly controlled response. One that didn't just defend, but pushed back. Hard. But before we get into what they said, you have to understand the weight of the moment. Up until this point, the story has belonged almost entirely to prosecutors, reporters, leaked documents, and fans dissecting clips frame by frame. Wendy and Eddie were silent, watching the narrative shape itself around them, watching strangers decide whether they were masterminds of a messy, calculated financial scheme, or stars caught in a system that never gave them the benefit of the doubt. So when they finally spoke, when that joint statement dropped, it wasn't just a PR move, it was a declaration, a warning shot, and honestly, a glimpse into how they plan to fight this case both in court and in the court of public opinion. Their statement begins with accusation, not against insurance companies, not against trolls online, but against law enforcement itself. According to Wendy and Eddie, the investigation into their alleged break-in was flawed from the very beginning. They claim police failed to properly investigate the initial burglary, despite what they describe as clear indications that someone broke into their home. They say this wasn't oversight or human error, it was bias. Bias against their family, against who they are, and the world they come from. It's a serious accusation, and it sets a clear tone. They're not accepting the narrative being pushed onto them. They're rewriting it. To them, this wasn't an ordinary case. This was sloppy work, followed by silence. 18 months of silence, to be exact. 18 months with no calls, no updates, no warnings. 18 months where, according to their statement, they heard nothing. Until the day they were arrested. They paint a picture of being blindsided, cooperative, waiting, expecting follow-up, only to be met with handcuffs after more than a year of what they describe as investigative abandonment. And then there's the comparison they make. They remind everyone, and very intentionally, that other Real Housewives cast members have returned home from publicized vacations to find their houses ransacked. It's happened before, many times, and yet, none of those cast members faced this level of scrutiny. Not the seizing of email accounts, Apple IDs, bank records, Instagram accounts, burner numbers, home security data. Not allegations of staged burglaries, insurance fraud, conspiracy, false statements. Not the public release of confidential information that Wendy and Eddie call unnecessary and deeply unfair. To the couple, this isn't just an investigation, it's an attack, a targeting, and they don't hide their suspicion that this might be political. They subtly point to their county, its demographics, its reputation. They point to Wendy's previous ties, her commentary, her work. They don't say it outright, but they say enough. Enough for people reading between the lines to understand exactly what they're implying. But then comes the line that everyone fixated on: aliases. Prosecutors claimed they used different names, that these alternate identities were part of a deliberate attempt to hide spending, to confuse financial trails, to gain credit cards disconnected from their legal names. It was one of the most viral parts of the entire case. People laughed, made memes, accused, speculated. The statement addresses this head-on. They say it's false, not exaggerated, not misinterpreted. False. According to them, these names were not used on financial applications, were not tied to accounts, and were not part of any scheme. They insist the names existed only for one purpose: package delivery. A safety measure for public figures. A way to prevent strangers from seeing their real name on a shipping label. A privacy shield used by celebrities, influencers, and TV personalities who have to navigate a world where fame attracts the wrong eyes to the wrong doors. But the prosecutors see something entirely different. They see names connected to financial behavior. They see patterns, they see debt, they see motive. And it's that word, motive, that their statement fights the hardest. They reject the idea that they are drowning financially. They reject the suggestion that they were desperate, reckless, or unstable. They call it ironic, offensive even, that the state would try to frame an accomplished professional couple as financially collapsing. They accuse the prosecution of exaggerating numbers, misrepresenting context, and leaking personal financial details to shape public perception. They say the release of their private records had no legitimate purpose, that it only fueled assumptions and encouraged conclusions that the case itself hasn't proven. They describe the entire situation as a breach, not just of their privacy, but of the justice process. And then they draw a line in the sand. They say they never used aliases for financial gain. They say the state began its deeper investigation only after they were charged. They call that irregular, alarming, and revealing. They question motives, not their own, but the state's. Their final message? They trust the court. They believe the court will stop further violations. They believe they will be vindicated. But belief isn't proof. Confidence isn't innocence. And a statement, no matter how passionately written, can't erase the evidence prosecutors say they have. A burglary with no ADT activity, a Ring camera that saw nothing, claims of stolen items that allegedly sat quietly in the home the whole time, an email asking about additional high-value items to reach the policy maximum. And that's what makes this moment so intense. Two stories. Two versions of the truth. Two completely different realities. Now the world is left to ask, is this a case of a couple unfairly targeted, mishandled, and misrepresented? Or is it a carefully crafted defense against a scandal far deeper than the public realized? Part 2 will take us into the prosecutor's side, the debt, the cards, the timeline, and the alleged motive behind everything. What makes this situation even more unsettling is how sharply the prosecution's version contradicts everything Wendy and Eddie insist is true. Because while their statement frames them as blindsided, cooperative, and unfairly targeted, the court filings paint a picture that is almost unrecognizable in comparison. A picture of financial instability, questionable decisions, and a paper trail that prosecutors believe reveals a motive deeper than what the couple is willing to admit. One of the first revelations that shook people wasn't the burglary report itself. It was what investigators say they found after digging into the couple's financial records. According to prosecutors, Wendy and Eddie were allegedly juggling an astonishing number of financial instruments, around 40 credit and debit cards tied to them, their businesses, and even, allegedly, names that don't legally belong to either of them. It's the kind of detail that instantly raises eyebrows. Not necessarily because it proves wrongdoing, but because it suggests complexity, layers of spending, accounts, and transactions stacked one on top of another. To some, it looks like modern entrepreneurship. Multiple businesses, multiple expenses, multiple accounts. But to prosecutors, this wasn't just variety, it was volume. And that volume, they argue, hints at something else entirely. Pressure. Pressure to maintain a lifestyle that reality TV amplifies. Pressure to keep up with castmates whose wealth seems bottomless. Pressure to look like the couple who always has it together. And pressure, in the eyes of the state, can become motive. Behind closed doors, according to filings, investigators believe the couple was dealing with substantial debt. Debt, the prosecution claims, spread across personal accounts, business ventures, and credit lines. Debt that contradicts the image portrayed on the show: the renovations, the designer wardrobes, the trips, the celebrations, the declarations of success. The prosecutors argue that when a family begins to feel that financial squeeze, especially a public family expected to maintain a certain standard, the temptation to find a solution becomes stronger. In their renderings of events, the alleged staged burglary wasn't a random act. It was strategic, planned, timed, a scheme created to claim nearly $500,000 in luxury items. But then there's the moment that continues to haunt discussions about this case: the email. The email investigators claim Eddie sent to Wendy just days after the reported burglary. In it, he allegedly lists the items they said were stolen: bags, jewelry, high-value pieces. And then the line that people can't forget: "Are there any additional high-value items we can add? I'm trying to get the total to exceed $423,000, our policy maximum." For prosecutors, that's not circumstantial. That's intent. They present it as the heart of the case, the line that shows this wasn't panic, confusion, or desperation. It was a target, a goal, a number they were allegedly trying to hit. Wendy and Eddie's camp has not yet publicly explained that email. Their statement sidesteps it, focusing instead on the investigation's fairness, not the content of their communications. And until they address it directly, the email remains one of the most pointed pieces of the state's argument. Then comes the search. The day deputies entered the home armed with a warrant, not just for documents, but for property. Prosecutors say they found at least 15 items the couple reported as stolen. Items that were supposed to have vanished during that alleged break-in. Items that had been logged, photographed, and sworn to be missing. To law enforcement, this was one of the clearest indicators something was wrong. Because it's not unheard of to misremember a few items in the chaos of fear. But 15? 15 is a number that requires explanation. The defense hasn't offered one yet. Instead, they've focused on the argument that the state leaked confidential financial details to sway public opinion. They argue that none of these details, aliases, card counts, spending habits, should have been made public at all. They call it a breach, a violation, a smear. They insist the state is exaggerating, inflating, and sensationalizing. They paint it as a strategy meant to poison the well before trial even begins. And this case has become a battle, not just of facts, but of narratives. On one side, prosecutors presenting patterns of spending, alleged returns of luxury items, alleged overlapping insurance claims, alleged attempts to hit policy limits, and alleged inconsistencies in the burglary timeline. A picture of a couple under financial pressure, allegedly using the system to escape it. On the other side, Wendy and Eddie portraying themselves as a hardworking family, blindsided by an aggressive, biased investigation, targeted unfairly, and forced into the spotlight by leaks they say were unjustified and designed to embarrass. But the strangest thing about this whole situation is how much remains uncertain. For every document prosecutors release, For every detail that seems to tighten the case, there are people asking questions that don't fully go away. If they staged the burglary, why choose items so specific and traceable? If they wanted to fake a loss, why keep the ring visible on Instagram? If the burglary was real, why does ADT show nothing? Why does Ring show nothing? Why weren't they contacted for 18 months? Why were their private records released so publicly? And why, in all the chaos, does none of this resemble a clean, organized scheme? It's as if the entire case is a puzzle where some pieces fit perfectly, and others don't fit at all. Then, layered into this storm, comes the Aliases segment. The moment the internet latched onto the names Pam Oliver and Eddie Hennessy with gleeful disbelief. It became jokes, memes, commentary, late-night humor. But beneath the laughter is a very real question. Were these aliases used for harmless privacy, or something far more intentional? Wendy and Eddie insist it's privacy. Prosecutors insist it's concealment. Two explanations. One truth, and no clarity yet on which one will hold up in court. What makes this case so gripping, so volatile, is that both sides are betting on perception. Wendy and Eddie are fighting to humanize themselves, to cast doubt on the investigation, to reframe the narrative. Prosecutors are fighting to establish intent, to assemble a timeline that clicks together like gears in a machine. Each side knows the audience is watching. Each knows the internet is waiting. Each knows every sentence can shape a storyline, a reputation, a season, or a sentence. But what lies beneath everything, the statements, the filings, the updates, is something simpler and far more human. What really happened inside that house in April 2024? Was it chaos, fear, misunderstanding, and bad timing? Or was it something far more deliberate? These questions will follow Wendy and Eddie until the day they stand in a courtroom and tell their version under oath. And until then, all we have are two stories that cannot both be true. The truth is coming, but it may not be the truth either side expects. And as the dust keeps rising around this case, one reality becomes impossible to ignore. The longer this drags on, the more the story mutates. It shifts, bends, stretches, and pulls apart into versions that depend entirely on who's telling it. Supporters point to Wendy and Eddie as victims of an overzealous prosecution. Critics point to the filings and see a pattern too large to ignore. And everyone else, stuck in the middle, can't help noticing the contradictions stacking up like a tower that someone is eventually going to knock over. But that is exactly what makes this moment so crucial. Because the deeper you go into the details, the more it becomes obvious that the truth, whatever it is, will not surface quietly. Someone's version of events will collapse under scrutiny. Someone's story will unravel. And someone's credibility will not survive the courtroom. Up until this point, Wendy and Eddie's strongest defense has been their calm. Their unwavering insistence that the state acted rashly, unfairly, and irresponsibly. Their claim that they were left completely in the dark for 18 months, never contacted, never questioned, never warned. Their argument that they cooperated fully, and yet were blindsided by the arrest. In their statement, they frame themselves as victims twice over. Victims of a burglary, and victims of a biased investigation. And if that version is true, then yes, it is horrifying. But then, there's the prosecution's version. A version that paints the couple as composed, calm, and cooperative only because they allegedly believed they had executed their plan cleanly. A version that suggests the state wasn't silent for 18 months. Rather, investigators were quietly collecting, building, connecting dots, pulling camera data, requesting warrants, reviewing transactions, and waiting, not because they forgot about the case, but because they were watching everything unfold, tracing movements, studying timelines, and preparing to move only when they believed they had enough. And here's where the contradiction gets darker. If prosecutors really believed they had the wrong people, they wouldn't have taken 18 months. If prosecutors were unsure, they wouldn't have indicted. And if prosecutors were reckless, they wouldn't be releasing this much detail. Investigators releasing warrants to Google, Meta, Apple, bank institutions, luxury retailers, and home security companies is not the behavior of a sloppy investigation. It's the behavior of a calculated one. But the defense insists this calculation wasn't about thoroughness, it was about targeting. That claim is more serious than many people realize. The subtle suggestion that Carroll County's political climate could have influenced how the investigation unfolded is not just a throwaway line, it's a strategic argument. A powerful one, and potentially a dangerous one if they intend to use it in court. Because if they can prove bias, inconsistency, or procedural errors, anything from mishandled evidence to flawed warrants to selective enforcement, the entire case changes. It doesn't matter how many credit cards exist, how many items were found in the house, or how suspicious the email looks. If the investigation is tainted, the evidence becomes fragile. If the process is flawed, the accusations lose weight. And if the state broke protocol, the defense wins leverage they're desperately going to need. And that is exactly why the prosecution's release of private financial details became such a flashpoint. Suddenly, people weren't just talking about stolen items or aliases, they were talking about fairness, ethics, intent. Why did the public need to know about the number of credit cards? Why did the public need to know about alleged aliases? Why were these details released before trial? Why is the state revealing more to the public than they've revealed in the courtroom? Even people who believe Wendy and Eddie might be guilty have asked these questions. Because regardless of the couple's innocence or guilt, the prosecution's methods create an optics problem, a narrative problem, a vulnerability. If the state mishandled anything, even one warrant, one timestamp, one chain of custody, this entire case becomes complicated, messy, vulnerable to dismissal. And that's why, whether people admit it or not, this case has quietly become one of the most unpredictable scandals in Real Housewives history. Because it's not just a legal battle, it's a psychological one, a public one, a narrative one. Every detail released becomes a weapon for one side or ammunition for the other. And then there's the reality TV factor. When you're a public figure, perception is currency. And Wendy knows that. The moment she said, "When the time is right, I will tell my story," fans knew exactly what that meant. The reunion, the cameras, the storyline, a moment that could turn scandal into opportunity, a moment that could flip public sentiment in ways a courtroom never could. Reality TV is, in many ways, trial by audience, and audiences are unpredictable. Some see Wendy as a strong, educated woman unfairly dragged into a system that targets people who look like her. Others see someone who wanted the lifestyle, the labels, the spotlight, and the storyline, and made choices to maintain it. And a growing number believe both things can be true at once. Because this case is not black and white. It's messy, it's layered, it's filled with inconsistencies that make either side entirely believable and entirely suspicious at the same time. For example, take the absence of ADT activity. If there was truly a break-in, why did the system show nothing? Did the burglars disable it? Did it malfunction? Did Wendy and Eddie misunderstand the data? Or did it simply never happen? The defense says reality stars are targeted all the time. The prosecution says nothing in the house shows evidence of forced entry. The defense says the state ignored them for 18 months. The prosecution says those 18 months were used to gather evidence. The defense says alleged aliases were used only for privacy. The prosecution says they were used to conceal identity. Two interpretations, one timeline, no agreement. Then comes the Ring camera, which reportedly captured nothing except an Amazon delivery. That detail alone could be innocent. Ring cameras miss things all the time. Angles, blind spots, battery failures, timing issues. These are common, but prosecutors claim the camera functioned perfectly, which means the absence of suspicious footage becomes ironically suspicious. And that's where the public becomes divided. People who believe Wendy think the lack of footage proves nothing. People who don't believe Wendy think the lack of footage proves everything. It's a stalemate, a looping circle, a perfect example of how two people can look at the same fact and walk away with opposite conclusions. But the biggest contradiction, the one no one can escape, is the recovered property. The 15 items reportedly found in the home. The defense has not explained that. The prosecution doesn't need to explain that. The public can't stop talking about it. For many viewers, that single detail is the turning point. Because even if you accept the possibility of bias, even if you believe the investigation was sloppy, even if you believe the aliases were harmless, even if you believe the credit cards were business-related. How do you explain stolen items being inside the house? Mistake? Oversight? Miscommunication? Planting? Coincidence? This is the piece of the puzzle that no one, not even the most loyal fans, can rationalize without discomfort. And it is that discomfort that hangs over this entire case like a shadow. A shadow that grows darker with every update. A shadow that refuses to disappear, no matter how many legal statements are released. Because somewhere between the burglary report, the search warrants, the credit cards, the aliases, the email, the recovered items, and the silence of 18 months, something doesn't add up. And the truth, whatever it is, will not stay buried forever. And now the real question becomes, what happens next? Because this story isn't slowing down. Every new filing, every leaked detail, every courtroom move is reshaping the narrative in real time. And you already know we're going to break it down the moment something shifts. But for now, I want to hear from you. Not the edited reunion version, not the legal statements, your unfiltered take. Do you believe Wendy and Eddie are being unfairly targeted? Do you think the prosecution is overreaching? Or do the contradictions feel too big to ignore? Drop your thoughts below, but keep it respectful. This case is messy, layered, and nowhere near finished. And trust me, the next twist is already on the way. If you want every update the second it breaks, the filings, the hearings, the behind-the-scenes details the networks won't show, make sure you're locked in. Hit the like button if you're following the case. Make sure you're subscribed. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single chapter of this unfolding scandal. Because if this week proved anything, it's that the Real Housewives world can change in an instant, and you're not going to want to miss what comes next.